35.
And 1 November Romeo, I need you outside of the Bravo.
Negative.
Negative what?
I'm inside.
You were not given a clearance through the Bravo. 1 November Romeo, exit the Bravo immediately.
I've been talking to you the whole time. That's the whole point of talking to you.
You have to have a Bravo clearance. You have to request a Bravo clearance.
The Bravo clearance about 50 miles ago.
Nobody clears you through the Bravo but me.
Then clear me through.
No.
Yes.
Welcome back to Wings of Bibles. I'm Dustin, and today we'll be covering operating in various types of airspace. I will only be covering Class Golf through Alpha, and I will cover the various types of special use airspace, restricted airspace, all that in another video. Starting off here, we have 91-126, operating on or in the vicinity of an airport in Class Golf airspace. Unless otherwise authorized or required, each person operating an aircraft on or in the vicinity of an airport in a Class Golf airspace must comply with the requirements of this section. So if you're going to operate in a Class Golf airspace, you have to comply with these things. When approaching to land at an airport without an operating control tower in Class Golf airspace, each pilot of an airplane must make all turns of that airplane to the left unless the airport displays approved light signals or visual markings indicating that turns should be made to the right, in which case the pilot must make all turns to the right. So in a Class Golf airspace, the standard turn is left turns in the traffic pattern, unless there's some type of visual or light signal that indicates that all turns should be made to the right, and you can also find that in the chart supplement. Each pilot of a helicopter or a powered parachute must avoid the flow of fixed-wing aircraft. Flap settings. Except when necessary for training or certification, the pilot in command of a civil turbojet-powered aircraft must use as a final flap setting the minimum certificated landing flap setting set forth in the approved performance information and the airplane flight manual for the applicable conditions. However, each pilot in command has the final authority and responsibility for the safe operation of the pilot's airplane and may use a different flap setting for that airplane if the pilot determines that it is necessary in the interest of safety. So this is kind of referencing 91.3. It's saying that you have to use the minimum certificated landing flap setting in the POH, but if you determine that you need more flaps because of the length of the runway, then you can use it. Communications with control towers. Unless otherwise authorized or required by ATC, no person may operate an aircraft to, from, through, or on an airport having an operational control tower, unless two-way radio communications are maintained between that aircraft and the control tower. Communications must be established prior to 4 nautical miles from the airport up to and including 2,500 feet AGL above ground level. However, if the aircraft radio fails in flight, the pilot in command may operate that aircraft and land if weather conditions are at or above basic VFR weather minimums. Visual contact with the tower is maintained and a clearance to land is received. If the aircraft radio fails while in flight under IFR, the pilot must comply with 91-185. Next we have 91-127. Operating on or in the vicinity of an airport in Class Echo airspace. Unless otherwise required by Part 93 of this chapter, or unless otherwise authorized or required by the ATC facility having jurisdiction over the Class Echo airspace area, each person operating an aircraft on or in the vicinity of an airport in a Class Echo airspace must comply with the requirements of 9126, which is Class Golf. So in addition to having to follow these things, you have to follow the things that we said in the last FAR. Departures. Each pilot of an aircraft must comply with any traffic patterns established for that airport in Part 93 of this chapter. Unless otherwise authorized or required by ATC, no person may operate an aircraft to, from, through, or on an airport having an operational control tower unless two-way radio communications are maintained between that aircraft and the control tower. Communications must be established prior to 4 nautical miles from the airport, up to and including 2,500 feet AGL. However, if the aircraft radio fails in flight, the pilot in command may operate that aircraft and land if weather conditions are at or above basic VFR weather minimums. Visual contact with the tower is maintained, and a clearance to land is received. If the aircraft radio fails while in flight under IFR, the pilot must comply with 91-185, which is IFR operations two-way radio communications failure. And we'll go into that more in depth in another video on IFR. Now we have 91-129 operations in Class Delta airspace. Unless otherwise authorized or required by the ATC facility having jurisdiction over the Class Delta airspace area, each person operating an aircraft in Class Delta airspace must comply with the applicable provisions of this section. In addition, each person must comply with 91-126, which is Class Golf, and 91-127, which is Class Echo. For the purpose of this section, the primary airport is the airport for which the Class Delta airspace area is designated. A satellite airport is any other airport within the Class Delta airspace area. So, what is this section saying? Unless ATC says otherwise, you have to comply with Class Golf and Class Echo rules. And in addition, they're giving a definition for a satellite airport and the primary airport. The primary airport is where the Class Delta airspace is originating from, and a satellite airport is any other airport in the vicinity or in the boundaries of that Class Delta. An operator may deviate from any provision of this section under the provisions of an ATC authorization issued by the ATC facility having jurisdiction over the airport concerned. ATC may authorize a deviation on a continuing basis or for an individual flight as appropriate. Each person operating an aircraft in Class Delta airspace must meet the following two-way radio communication requirements. So now we're going over the communication requirements in Class Delta. Arrival or through flight. Each person must establish two-way radio communications with the ATC facility, including foreign ATC in the case of foreign airspace designated in the United States, providing air traffic services prior to entering that airspace and thereafter maintain those communications while within that airspace. So this is saying if you're arriving to that airport with Class Delta airspace or you're just flying through it, you can't do that if you don't have two-way radio communications, which basically means you're talking to the ATC. Departing flight. Each person from the primary airport or satellite airport with an operating control tower must establish and maintain two-way radio communications with the control tower and thereafter as instructed by ATC while operating in the Class Delta airspace area, or from a satellite airport without an operating control tower must establish and maintain two-way radio communications with the ATC facility having jurisdiction over the Class Delta airspace as soon as practicable after departing. So they're saying if you're leaving the airport, you have to maintain two-way radio communications. And if you're departing a satellite airport within the boundaries of that Class Delta airspace, you also have to have two-way radio communications as soon as possible. Communications failure. Each person who operates an aircraft in a Class Delta airspace area must maintain two-way radio communications with the ATC facility having jurisdiction over that area. If the aircraft radio fails in flight under IFR, the pilot must comply with 91-185 of the part. If the aircraft radio fails in flight under VFR, the pilot in command may operate that aircraft and land if weather conditions are at or above basic VFR weather minimums, visual contact with the tower is maintained, and a clearance to land is received. Minimum altitudes when operating to an airport in Class Delta airspace. Unless required by the applicable distance from cloud criteria, each pilot operating a large or turbine-powered airplane must enter the traffic pattern at an altitude of at least 1,500 feet above the elevation of the airport and maintain at least 1,500 feet until further descent is required for a safe landing. So this is saying any aircraft that is other than a piston aircraft, small aircraft, must maintain 15,000 feet above the elevation of the airport. That's the basic traffic pattern for turbine-powered airplane. I do have to add that for general aviation and smaller aircraft, the pattern altitude is 1,000 feet above the elevation of the airport. Each pilot operating a large or turbine-powered airplane approaching to land on a runway served by an instrument approach procedure with vertical guidance, if the airplane is so equipped, must. Now this is just IFR here, so we won't go too in depth in this, but we'll read through it. Operate that airplane at an altitude at or above the glide path between the published final approach fix and the decision altitude DA or decision height DH as applicable. If compliance with the applicable distance from cloud criteria requires a glide path interception closer in, operate that airplane at or above the glide path between the point of interception of the glide path and DA or the decision height. Like I said, this is IFR. We won't go into in depth into that, and I'll probably start creating videos on IFR soon. Each pilot operating an airplane approaching to land on a runway served by a visual approach slope indicator must maintain an altitude at or above the glide path until a lower altitude is necessary for safe landing. Paragraphs E2 and E3 of this section do not prohibit normal bracketing maneuvers above or below the glide path that are conducted for the purpose of remaining on the glide path. Approaches. Except when conducting a circling approach under Part 97 of this chapter, or unless otherwise required by ATC, each pilot must circle the airport to the left if operating an airplane, or avoid the flow of fixed-wing aircraft if operating a helicopter. Departures. No person may operate an aircraft departing from an airport except in compliance with the following. Each pilot must comply with any departure procedures established for that airport by the FAA, unless otherwise required by the prescribed departure procedure for that airport or the applicable distance from cloud criteria. Each pilot of a turbine-powered airplane and each pilot of a large airplane must climb to an altitude of 1,500 feet above the surface as rapidly as practicable. So that whole section is on IFR. Noise abatement. Where a formal runway use program has been established by the FAA, each pilot of a large or turbine-powered airplane assigned a noise abatement runway by ATC must use that runway. However, consistent with the final authority of the pilot in command concerning the safe operation of the aircraft as prescribed in 91.3, ATC may assign a different runway if requested by the pilot in the interest of safety. There it is again, 91.3. You can deviate from this under 91.3, and ATC can assign you another runway if it's in the interest of safety. Takeoff, landing, taxi clearance. No person may, at an airport with an operating control tower, operate an aircraft on a runway or taxi, or take off or land an aircraft unless an appropriate clearance is received from ATC. So unlike Class Golf and Class Echo, to even take off, land, or taxi at the airport, you have to receive clearance from ATC. Moving on to Class Charlie airspace. 91130, operations in Class Charlie airspace. Unless otherwise authorized by ATC, each aircraft operation in Class Charlie airspace must be conducted in compliance with this section and 91129, which is Class Delta. For the purpose of this section, the primary airport is the airport for which the Class Charlie airspace area is designated, and a satellite airport is any other airport within the Class Charlie airspace area. No person may take off or land an aircraft at a satellite airport within a Class Charlie airspace area except in compliance with the FAA arrival and departure traffic patterns. Each person operating an aircraft in Class Charlie airspace must meet the following two-way radio communication requirements. So just like Class Delta, we have two-way radio communication requirements. Arrival or through flight, each person must establish two-way radio communications with the ATC facility, including foreign ATC in the case of foreign airspace designated in the United States, providing air traffic services prior to entering that airspace, and thereafter maintain those communications while within that airspace. For departing flights, each person from the primary airport or satellite airport with an operating control tower must establish and maintain two-way radio communications with the control tower, and thereafter, as instructed by ATC, while operating in the Class Charlie airspace area, or from a satellite airport without an operating control tower, must establish and maintain two-way radio communications with the ATC facility having jurisdiction over the Class Charlie airspace area as soon as practicable after departing. Equipment requirements. Unless otherwise authorized by the ATC having jurisdiction over the Class Charlie airspace area, no person may operate an aircraft within a Class Charlie airspace area designated for an airport unless that aircraft is equipped with the applicable equipment specified in 91-215, which is ATC transponder and altitude reporting equipment and use, and after January 1st, 2020, 91-225. Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast, ADSB, out equipment and use. And I'll create a video just on required equipment and inoperative equipment later. Deviations. An operator may deviate from any provision of this section under the provisions of an ATC authorization issued by the ATC facility having jurisdiction over the airspace concerned. ATC may authorize a deviation on a continuing basis or for an individual flight as appropriate. Up next, we have Class Bravo airspace, 91131 operations in Class Bravo airspace. No person may operate an aircraft within a Class Bravo airspace area except in compliance with 129.91.129 and the following rules. The operator must receive an ATC clearance from the ATC facility having jurisdiction for that area before operating an aircraft in that area. Unless otherwise authorized by ATC, each person operating a large turbine engine powered airplane to or from a primary airport for which a Class Bravo airspace is designated must operate at or above the designated floors of the Class Bravo airspace area while within the lateral limits of that area. Any person conducting pilot training operations at an airport within a Class Bravo airspace area must comply with any procedure established by ATC for such operations in that area. So, a big thing about Class Bravo airspace is you have to receive explicit clearance to enter the Class Bravo airspace. The ATC has to say you are cleared to enter the Bravo. Pilot requirements. No person may take off or land a civil aircraft at an airport within a Class Bravo airspace area or operate a civil aircraft within a Class Bravo airspace unless the pilot in command holds at least a private pilot certificate, the pilot in command holds a recreational pilot certificate and has met the requirements of 61101D of this chapter, or the requirements for a student pilot seeking a recreational pilot certificate in 6194 of this chapter. The pilot in command holds a sport pilot certificate and has met the requirements of 61325 of this chapter, or the requirements for a student pilot seeking a recreational pilot certificate in 6194 of this chapter, or the aircraft is operated by a student pilot who has met the requirements of 6194 or 6195 of this chapter as applicable. And we'll go over that in a bit. Notwithstanding the provisions of paragraph B1II, B1III, and B1IV of this section, no person may take off or land a civil aircraft at those airports listed in Section 4 of Appendix D to this part unless the pilot in command holds at least a private pilot certificate. Communications and navigation equipment requirements. Unless otherwise authorized by ATC, no person may operate an aircraft within a Class Bravo airspace area unless that aircraft is equipped with, for IFR operations, so this is what you need if you're operating Class Bravo under IFR operations. So you need an operable VOR or TACAN receiver, or an operable and suitable RNAV system, and for all operations, an operable two-way radio capable of communication with the ATC on appropriate frequencies for that Class Bravo airspace area. So this is saying what type of equipment and what type of communications you need for operation in Class Bravo airspace. Other equipment requirements. No person may operate an aircraft in Class Bravo airspace area unless the aircraft is equipped with the applicable operating transponder and automatic altitude reporting equipment specified in 91-215A, except as provided in 91-215E, and after January 1st, 2020, the applicable automatic dependent surveillance broadcast out equipment specified in 91-225. Now we can't talk about Class Bravo airspace without talking about 6195. Operations in Class Bravo airspace and at airports located within Class Bravo airspace. This is specifically for student pilots. A student pilot may not operate an aircraft on a solo flight in Class Bravo airspace unless the student pilot has received both ground and flight training from an authorized instructor on that Class Bravo airspace area, and the flight training was received in the specific Class Bravo airspace area for which solo flight is authorized. The logbook of that student pilot has been endorsed by the authorized instructor who gave the student pilot flight training, and the endorsement is dated within the 90-day period preceding the date of the flight in that Class Bravo airspace area, and the logbook endorsement specifies that the student pilot has received the required ground and flight training and has been found proficient to conduct solo flight in that specific Class Bravo airspace. So to fly in Class Bravo airspace as a solo student pilot, you have to do these things. A student pilot may not operate an aircraft on a solo flight to, from, or at an airport located within Class Bravo airspace pursuant to 91-131 of this chapter, unless the student pilot has received both ground and flight training from an instructor authorized to provide training to operate at that airport, and the flight and ground training has been received at the specific airport for which the solo flight is authorized. The logbook of that student pilot has been endorsed by an authorized instructor who gave the student pilot flight training, and the endorsement is dated within the 90-day period preceding the date of the flight at that airport, and the logbook endorsement specifies that the student pilot has received the ground and flight training and has been found proficient to conduct solo flight operations at that specific airport. This section does not apply to a student pilot seeking a sport pilot certificate or a recreational pilot certificate. So, this section is talking about what you need and what you have to do to operate solo as a student pilot in Class Bravo. So just to recap, you have to receive ground and flight training for that specific Class Bravo airspace. So it can't be training for another Class Bravo airspace. And you also have to receive a solo endorsement, a 90-day solo endorsement, and then you have to get a logbook endorsement that says you have received ground training for that specific Class Bravo airspace. And finally, we have 91-135, operations in Class Alpha airspace. Except as provided in paragraph D of this section, each person operating an aircraft in Class Alpha airspace must conduct that operation under Instrument Flight Rules, IFR, and in compliance with the following. So in Class Alpha airspace, the only type of operations that are allowed are IFR. You can't fly VFR in Class Alpha airspace. Operations may be conducted only under an ATC clearance received prior to entering the airspace. Unless otherwise authorized by ATC, each aircraft operating in Class Alpha airspace must be equipped with two-way radio capable of communicating with ATC on a frequency assigned by ATC. Each pilot must maintain two-way radio communications with ATC while operating in Class Alpha airspace. Equipment requirements. Unless otherwise authorized by ATC, no person may operate an aircraft within Class Alpha airspace unless that aircraft is equipped with the applicable equipment specified in 91-215 and after January 1st, 2020, 91-225. ATC authorizations. An operator may deviate from any provision of this section under the provisions of an ATC authorization issued by the ATC facility having jurisdiction of the airspace concerned. In the case of an inoperative transponder, ATC may immediately approve an operation with a Class Alpha airspace area, allowing flight to continue, if desired, to the airport of ultimate destination, including any intermediate stops, or to proceed to a place where suitable repairs can be made, or both. Requests for a deviation from any provision of this section must be submitted in writing at least 4 days before the proposed operation. ATC may authorize a deviation on a continuing basis or for an individual flight. And that's going to be it for this video on operations in various types of airspace. Like I said in the beginning of the video, this video is for only Class Golf through Class Alpha airspace. I'll do a video later about the special use airspaces. If you want to learn more about that, subscribe and you'll be notified when I upload that video. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one. See ya!